do some smart searches using the combination of ChatGPT and your Google Scholar, right? Yeah, so we continue on that trajectory where we basically developing our proposal or our thesis on a weekly basis. So today, our focus is on moving from descriptive summaries to analytical literature review. That's what we focus on today. So we want to see how we can best develop a synthesized literature review using our chat GPT. There's quite a lot of platforms that one can use. There's no Lutando or Flamini. Can you please mute? I can hear myself on mic. All right, thank you so much. So what we basically want to achieve in this presentation is that we want to see how we can develop a synthesized literature review, and how we can move away from the basic approach that normally most of our students, especially honors and master's students, they tend to develop a literature review that is narrative in nature, that is not well synthesized. So the purpose of this demonstration and presentation is to get to the point where you'd have to develop a synthesized literature review. So first things first, my name is Dr. Morenga, and I'm gonna be with you until the 27th of June on this series of workshops, right, where we bring in the AI human collaboration as a way of enhancing and streamlining our research process for master's, honors, and PhD students, and also early career researchers. Right. So I've I'm a founder of African Leaders in AI, an organization that spearheading the implementation and use of AI in all sectors of society. I specifically focus on AI and research within the higher education space, but also my research area interest is in media, journalism, and communication, where I also look at issues of gender and women portrayal, particularly women leaders. So that's my research area. So I participated extensively in the developing of the UKZN AI policy, where my thoughts also put in my 6 cents in there. Then I'm a former member of the UKZN AI task force, right, where I was responsible in training deans, academic leaders, and your, your students, your postgraduate students, in how to effectively use AI in an ethical manner, right? So I'm carrying up on that project beyond the university settings, right? I advise deans, academic leaders on AI ethics, especially in examining, disputes of where students are being accused of having used AI extensively, right? So I've been involved with that kind of work for a long time, and to date, I've trained more than 1,000 academics and researchers on the ethics of generative AI within the research space. We have a platform that we are working on developing. I think it's, well, safely say 75% developed, that conducts your research for you. I think in one of our presentation before we start, I'll arrange that next week. We do a video demonstration of how that platform works. It's a very interesting platform for researchers who are doing qualitative research. Right. So,
As Dr.
that
Tige,
said, was that a comment? Right. So we will be having, like I said, these workshops on a weekly basis. From we started in January, and the series ends
katika serikali
in
kwa activia
All right, there's somebody who is presenting there with me. Cleopas, 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 can you meet? Cleopas? Cleopas, can you please assist us by muting? Thank you. Then weekly research webinars every Saturday. So we are basically taking you through the process of writing a dissertation, a thesis, or your research proposal with the combination of AI and the human collaboration. So that's what we're doing on a weekly basis. Right. So now the question is, why should we bother about having a literature review? Why, in actual fact, synthesize, why is it important to have a synthesized literature review? Right, most of us might want to say a literature review is a review of literature, relevant literature, but this is one of the most difficult things to do, to conduct in an honors or master's or PhD thesis. Very difficult to conduct. So the question is, why literature synthesis matters? So we're saying a strong literature review, it has to demonstrate some key aspects. It has to have some things that it needs to have. For example, it needs to have an intellectual positioning in a field, within a field. Number two, we need to understand of dominant debates. Number three, you need an awareness to demonstrate an awareness of competing theories. Then you also need to have identification of conceptual and methodological gaps in your theory, right? So basically, the whole idea of a literature review or a synthesized literature review is justification for your research contribution. We need you to situate yourself to say, this is my contribution to the debate about this particular subject or field of inquiring, right? So the key point that I want to stress in this particular point is that supervisors and reviewers are not asking, have you read enough, right? What they're rather looking for is that, or they're asking for, is that, can you think across what you read? So we're moving beyond the idea of us saying this scholar said, the other scholar said, C said, to coming and looking at through what they have said. What are we getting from what they've said? What is the meaning of what they've said? Right? We'll demonstrate that as we proceed. So this presentation is structured in two. The first section will, as usual, will have a conceptual presentation where we do the PowerPoint presentation, understanding that as academics, it's very difficult to get across academics if you do not come up with a PowerPoint presentation, right? So that's what we're going to do. But there's a common problem, right? Everything emanates from a problem. Why are we talking about a synthesized literature review? Sorry, in this presentation, we're not going to be defining what a literature review is. We're not going to be talking about the different kinds of a literature review, because our objective and goal is to come up with a synthesized literature review. That's what we need, a synthesized literature review. So whether the literature review is a descriptive, a scoping, or systematic or bibliometric, it doesn't matter at this particular point. What we want to achieve is we want to come up with a synthesized literature review. Then it emanates from the common problem that we see in most of the dissertations and theses. And it's sad because some supervisors have come and are accustomed and accepted that kind of literature review, the descriptive writing in literature review, right? We've examined about a decent number of theses, right? In PhD and masters and honors. I can't even count honors, right? I've examined them, quite a lot of them, and I had an opportunity to examine prior to your AI and during the era of AI, right? So I've seen the transition and the change in how the literature reviews are being done, right? And from that experience, right, we've decided to say, let's have a conversation around the common problem, and the common problem in this particular case being descriptive writing. So there are typical patterns for descriptive patterns, right? In your literature review, is it pertains to students who are submitting their work. The first thing, and that worries me a lot in master's thesis and PhD thesis and dissertation, is that you would find the whole literature review. It starts by saying author A argues that, author B states that, similarly, author C found that, right? And the key characteristics of this kind of descriptive literature review is that they are reviewing one study at a time. So you are basically doing a study report, right? You're reporting on the studies. There is therefore no thematic organization, there's no critical comparison, there's no clear positioning of your study. Where do you or your study fit in within this whole matrix of what is being done? And I'm sure most of us are common and familiar with this. Well, so basically it will be a annotative bibliography, right? And it is presented, that annotative bibliography is therefore presented in this case as a literature review, and it's common amongst master's students. You just have your subheading, maybe your subheading is talking about the consequences of drug use in communities. Then the student begins to unwind author A in their study, this is what they found, and these are the findings, these were the methodologies used, these are the theories used. So you have chunks of paragraphs in the dissertation, right? Chunks of paragraphs. Each paragraph is focusing on each specific author and what they found, right? So they're looking at case on a study per study basis, right? And as a result, you'd find that there's no thematic organization, there's no critical comparison of what these studies are. They are not synthesized or integrated at the end. So that's what a common problem is in this, in writing literature reviews, right? That doesn't mean the student didn't do the work. They actually read the work. They actually do the research, because they went through all these 100 papers, that they went through 50 papers, and they know what the papers are talking about, right? But where the shortfall is that we are being presented with a mere description, right, of studies with that is devoid of critical comparison, devoid of thematic organization. And that's a shortfall. I mean, people are passing, but you struggle if you meet a different reviewer or examiner. So why, the question is, why is this problematic? Or why is the descriptive literature review problematic? Why should we be worried about the descriptive literature review? Is that it shows reading, but analytical thinking is close to zero, right? And at the master's and the PhD level, we expect you to have moved from you regurgitating knowledge or what people have done to you actually thinking through what people have done, what have they said, right? So you're presenting, you say, this is what they've said, but through what they've said, this is what can be deduced, right? So it is problematic to have a descriptive literature review because it does not build an argument, right? And I'm going to demonstrate that we need, when we are writing a literature review for a thesis, or when you're writing a literature review for a dissertation, you are basically using the literature that you're reviewing to push towards the argument of your paper. You're pushing the argument of your research through the lens of what has been done, right? So if you are arguing for, your argument is assuming that your argument is you're arguing that the over reliance on ChatGPT or your generative AI leads to laziness among academics, right? So you are not going to basically present a description of research, right? You are taking what have been said to push through that argument. So at the end, you'd find that your literature is not simply saying A said, B said, E said, right? You begin with a topic sentence that push your argument. Then you bring in authors and scholars that support your argument. Then at the end, then you synthesize that, which I will demonstrate to you as we proceed, right? So when we have a descriptive literature review, it makes the review long but intellectually thin, right? You can meet the 50 pages. I know I've been reading a literature review that is 50 pages. I've read literature reviews that are very long, and a person who spent 6 months saying, "Oh, this guys, a literature review is a tough one. Hey, I've met the number of pages, right?" But you want to ask yourself, is the goal meeting the 20 pages your supervisor require, or to produce a synthesized literature review, right? So what we often come across, is a literature review that is descriptive and long in nature, that meets the required number of pages, right? That is all the authors, recent authors. It ticks all those boxes, but you would find that it is thin, right? It is a bare and basic description of what other people have said, without a golden thread, the argument that is required there in that literature review, right? So that's what we normally coming across, right? So now, for us to get to have a synthesized literature review, fundamental things needs to be considered, right? We need to understand the differences between a descriptive of which we've already identified what a descriptive literature review is. Then we need to understand the difference between a summary, right, of which is one of the things that most students are presenting to us: a summary, an analysis, and a synthesis, right? Those are three different things that are often misconstrued by students, by masters and PhD students in their literature review when they're writing. What most people present for examination or to their supervisors at face value, it's a summary of what literature, of what has been done before, right? We're just getting a summary of, you're summarizing literature, right? Then some, and I'm confident to say very few provide an analysis, right? And very few provide a synthesis of what literature has been done. So what is a summary then? A summary then is you're basically restating what a single study says. You are summarizing, and it's said to say this is a common practice amongst most students. What you're simply saying is that you take one scholar, you're basically giving a summary of what the study was all about. Then you move to the next paragraph, you give us a summary again of what that study is all about. You move to the next one, you give a summary of what that study is all about. So basically you have 50 paragraphs in your study. You have 50 paragraphs in your literature review, and all these 50 paragraphs, each paragraph is focusing on a different literature, on a different study. Is focusing on a different study. You're giving us what the study was all about. You're giving us what the study found, the methodologies, the theories that they focus on. You're basically having a showdown, right, of what all these various studies have focused on. That's the summary, right? You focus is mostly, you'd see that a student or the writer is focusing on the findings of all these studies. You're looking at, oh, this is what they found, and what they found is very interesting, and it adds to the body of knowledge and stuff like that. So you are like, you have a horse, you are like a horse with blinkers that is only focusing on all those things, right? But let's move beyond that, right? So that is the summary. Now, what is an analysis, right? Now, an analysis examines strengths, it examines weaknesses and assumptions, and it also questions methods or theoretical positioning, right? So in this particular case, you are moving beyond summarizing, right, to analyzing what other students, what other reviewers have said, right? Right. So you are saying this particular study that I have, or this set of studies that we have, the strength of this study is, right, it lies in this. There are gaps in this study, and there are key assumptions is that, right? Then you question the methods that were used in that study to say, well, while this study has these strong findings, right? However, the methodology that was used here, it was a qualitative methodology with which has inherent weaknesses in that we cannot entirely generalize based on the specific case study that they used, which was focusing on a single case, right? So us generalizing these findings and their applicability to the broader spectrum might be limited, right? Therefore, there are gaps in this study or in this group of studies, and that gap necessitates us to conduct this kind of study that I'm proposing. Therefore, there is a case for us that is identified in this literature that we have. Or you can look at and you analyzing the theory that were employed, right? The theories that were employed. So this is a group of studies based. Most of them were relying on the feminist media theory, or they were relying on the systems theory. However, there is a gap. There is a blind side in these studies because the overemphasis or over reliance on this theory allowed them to not see the importance of other theories that are more relevant. Therefore, this study has a case. I have a case to move on to my study. Right. So that's what synthesis basically. That's what synthesis basically is all about. Right. So let's move on to the oh, that was an analysis. Now let's move on to synthesis. So by synthesis, what we basically saying is that you drawing on from themes, right? You are drawing on from themes, and you should know by now from our previous last week presentation, we said that you need to convert your research questions into headings, right? Convert your research questions into headings, and when you convert these research questions into headings, then you develop your literature based on what your key questions are. So you're using literature to answer your research questions, to develop an argument from your research questions, and those become themes. And you'd find that as you review this literature, some thematic issues are going to emerge, right? But these thematic aspects or patterns are not going to emerge from the blue. They are emerging guided by your key research questions. So this approach will allow you not to drift away from the aim of the study, from what your study intends to do. At the end of the day, when the document is complete, you'd find that everything that you have reviewed or synthesized or focused on is actually guided or within the parameters of your key research question or your objectives. So we are saying in this particular case, when you are synthesis, a synthesized literature review emanates from the key questions, and those key questions are converted into headings and themes and sub-themes, right? So we're saying when you are reviewing the literature, you need to integrate multiple studies into themes, right? So you'd say you would find that okay, my research question is asking about what is the role of generative AI in higher education, right? Then when you look at that, you'd find that there's the theme of research, there's the theme of teaching and learning, there's a theme of examination, there's a theme of assessments, right? So now what you're doing is that you categorize your literature according to these themes, right? You can actually go and use Boolean operators to search for literature for that particular theme only. Then you now not reporting or summarizing what studies have said, you're actually pushing an argument, drawing on your available theme or your question. So that's what we're saying. We're saying we identify patterns, tensions, right, within studies. This is where you're bringing in issues of saying, oh, there are convergences in these studies, right? There is the difference is this group of studies, this strand of research is going towards this direction, and the other one is going towards this direction. This one is in favor of generative AI. This one is against generative AI. That becomes your focal point of engagement, then you need to identify key debates. Those debates needs to be categorized. What are the prevailing debates? So we're saying in a synthesized literature review, you're moving away or you're detaching away yourself from summarizing to looking at patterns, tensions, and debates so that you can show what the body of knowledge collectively reviews. And what is being reviewed is in relation to what your key questions are asking, right? So we're saying shift is required. You're moving from isolated reporting of individual studies to reporting or integrated arguments and building an argument for your study. So you're building a strong case, and this strong case is building on your key research questions, right? So that's a synthesized literature review, right? What is analytical synthesis in practice, right? So how does it look like in practice before we get to your practical demonstration of how we can use ChatGPT to use to develop that synthesized paragraphs. So we'll do a brief demonstration. We need to see and make a difference between a descriptive paragraph and a synthesized paragraph, right? What each looks like, right? What is this analytical synthesis in practice? So now, in analytical synthesized paragraph or literature review involves the following things, right? It involves a key following points, right? You are grouping literature into conceptual clusters. This is very important. So you are grouping literature into different conceptual clusters. You have different concepts, right? We're looking at the concept of artificial intelligence in higher education. We're looking at the concept of copying and pasting. We're looking at the concept of hallucination. We're looking at the concept. So your literature will be structured around those, right? But you are not just summarizing those, you're actually pushing an argument to say, well, if my central argument is that AI is good, generative AI is good in higher education or in research, right? So that literature should review that argument, right? But it shouldn't have blind side, it shouldn't be blind or lopsided. It should also acknowledge those that do not appreciate your argument, right? So the second thing is that you need to be identifying dominant schools of thought, right? What are the key thoughts that are emerging in that literature? You need to be highlighting theoretical disagreements. What are the key theories that are being used, and what are the fallacies in those theories? As you integrate, as you push your literature review, you also need to recognize methodological patterns. I will be very sad to read a literature review that doesn't have a synthesis or a critique of methodological patterns within the particular strand of research, right? Your literature review it should have that section where you critique methodological patterns to say, generally, from the review of literature, we're finding that there is a over-reliance on quantitative studies. Most studies reviewed are quantitative studies, and it's worrying because quantitative studies have shortfalls, right? They do not cover those blind spots in terms of in-depth understanding or analysis or integration of insights from the participants. We're only reporting numbers, right? We're only reporting how many people use AI, but we're not understanding in a qualitative manner how these 90% people are actually using and how they think about the use of AI. So the methodological patterns need to be reviewed in your literature. And when you recognize these methodological patterns in your literature review, you get to the point of saying, I mean, there is really a need to have my study, which is a mixed method study, because we've seen that there's only two strands of literature. There's the quantitative, the qualitative. There is no one that is mixed methods, right? But also there's no one that is longitudinal. For example, you're doing studies that involve the use of AI. You're going to need to have a longitudinal study that says that looked at the introduction of AI, the uptake of AI, the current use, and what later use has been. So those are if you don't look at the methodological patterns and strands in your literature review, you lose a point where you can push the argument for your methodology or the rationale for your study that you're using. So we also need to identify unexplored areas, right? Unexplored areas. What are these studies have saying? This is what they've investigated, but what are the areas that are unexplored? You need to have that argument. You need to have that section in your literature review. You need to move beyond just looking at what has been done to say, this is what has not been done, right? And that will assist you to push for further research, right? We need to connect the debates to your research question. This is very important. What are your research questions? Like I said, the best way to do it is convert your research questions into key themes and headings, right? So the core question to ask is, what does this literature collectively suggest and what is missing? So when you close your eyes or when you're reading your work or your literature review, you need to ask yourself, what are we really saying here? What are they really saying? Right? Not what they are saying, but what are they really saying? Beyond what I'm seeing, what is being said, what is being suggested, what can I deduce from this literature? Until you answer those questions or explain those questions in your literature review, your literature review is more or less like a summary of what others have said, right? So there's three structures that are there that we need to follow, right, when we're writing our literature review. The first one is structuring a literature review along thematic structure, right? And this is the common one, right? In the thematic structure, your literature review is structured along the themes, right? So we're saying you organize the literature according to recurring concepts, the patterns or debates that appear across multiple studies, right? We've already established this. So instead of grouping by author, you group by ideas. And it's a very common mistake that most researchers do. You'd find that people group their research, their literature review according to authors. They begin by saying, author Moringa in their study, this is what they found, and this is what they've been doing, and these are the key findings, this is A, B, C, D. And they unwind, they go on and on and on. But we are saying a thematic structure, there has to be thematic structure. Your literature review should be thematic in nature. Look at recurring concepts, right? Look at patterns and look at debates, right? If researching, for example, if researching digital journalism, themes might be, right? So your themes that emerge might be monetization strategies, your audience engagement, platform dependence, ethical concerns, right? That within each theme, right? Remember, these themes are emerging from your research question, right? Within each and every theme, right, that you have identified, this is where you compare multiple authors, right? You show where they agree and you show where they disagree, and then you move in to identify gaps. So that's how your paragraphs or your themes, each and every theme should reflect. You go in there, identify a theme, right? And in each and every theme, you need to compare what the authors are saying. Have 10 authors in each and every theme, right? That you say, okay, in under this theme, I'm going to synthesize to review under these 10 authors, right? Then compare what these authors are saying, right? Then show areas of agreement. The authors are agreeing. And the moment you borrow on these terms, right, you're comparing multiple authors. When you bank these terms in your head before you start to write, show areas of agreement, highlight disagreement, and identify gaps. That's what you need to have. Right. So there is another theoretical literature review. I love this one so much. And when you are in journal publications, I think you'd find that most reviewers are actually and editors are actually preferring theoretical literature review. So in this case, what you are doing when you're doing a theoretical review is that you're organizing the literature according to different theories or conceptual frameworks scholars use, right? So instead of grouping by topic, you group by theoretical lenses, right? So you say my study focus on reporting of women leaders, women politicians in the media. Then I think through, then I say, what are the key concepts or key themes or key concepts, sorry, or theoretical concepts that are commonly used by scholars? Then I will say to myself, let's look at political economy concept, the political economy theory. Then that becomes my heading. Framing theory, post-colonial theory, feminist media theory. Then I go and look and categorize my debate around scholars and how they review, how they've done their work along these key theories, right? So I'm not having a summary of authors, but I'm looking at these 10 authors that focused on political economy theory, right, as it regards to how they have been used in reporting women leaders. So I'm advancing my argument from a theoretical position of position, and I'm advancing my argument from the framing theory position, right? And this theory, this approach is very strong, and it's very strong, especially when you want to develop a journal article. But more often, we've seen that even supervisors themselves, they actually tend to avoid this one because it's very strenuous. It's very difficult. But thank God we have AI now that can assist us in terms of getting to synthesize this theory or develop your literature review along these thematic or this conceptual line of thinking. Right. So there's another methodological structure. So you can decide to write your literature review along methodological structure. So you organize the literature based on research methods used in the field. Right. You are not grouping literature according to themes or concepts. Instead, you actually grouping your literature based on the methodologies that have been used. So you say quantitative, the strand of quantitative research, right? Quantitative based studies. Then you look at what are the quantitative studies that have been done in that area of your study, pushing your argument to say there's a gap in this area because these quantitative studies, this is what they focus on. You develop, you synthesize, you argue, then you move on to literature on qualitative research studies and what they're focusing in the context, the case studies, the mixed methods research. This kind of methodological approach or this kind of literature review, it allows you to identify gaps quickly, right? And how do you identify gaps quickly? Because you already seen that there is a gap. These studies are leaning towards quantitative or qualitative, and in their leaning towards qualitative and quantitative, there are already gaps in things that they didn't do, right? So you do that for all the methodology approaches that you know or that you've exposed to, right? So then as we move on, right now, this here, colleagues, is the best practice structure to do your literature review thematically, right? Is the most common structure and most preferred structure to do your literature review according to themes, right? So we're saying here, you begin with the analytical paragraph formula, right? So you begin with a theme, right? The theme will be, you introduce the debate, you compare evidence, you integrate multiple authors, critical engagement, you highlight tensions, limitations, or contradictions, then you link to your study, then you explain how your research questions, how this respond to your research questions. So this structure strength and coherence and argument, but I will show you how it looks like at the end, right? Now the question is, where does AI fit in this whole matrix, right? And I thought it was very important for us to familiarize ourselves with what it means to synthesize literature before we get to jump into AI. Because if we jump into AI without the fundamentals or the basic understanding of what the kind of literature review we're looking for is, we'll be doing an injustice to ourselves. So where AI fits into, where does it fit into this whole matrix, into this whole synthesizing? So we're going to use AI, particularly ChatGPT, that I prefer. I prefer using free versions, right? Other versions that are there, your Perplexity, your Science Space, you need to subscribe those things to get the best outcome. But you can get the best outcome from ChatGPT without even a subscription. That's why we're trying to avoid the shortfalls of required in subscription, right? So where does AI fit in this particular case? We're saying here that it becomes a strategic and ethical integration tool, right? AI tools like ChatGPT now can then support us, right? When we have literature gathered, like we gathered literature last week, right? So we need to do a rapid thematic grouping when we want to identify recurring concepts and we want to compare positions across text and also highlight contradictions. This is where ChatGPT comes into place, and we're going to use ChatGPT to develop those paragraphs, right? So now, however, AI should not, this is a key point, should not replace critical thinking. We need to make sure that we're not generating fake citations. In our previous presentation, one of the days, we also looked at how to avoid fallacies, hallucinations, and other things. So we want to use ChatGPT to also to make sure that we are verifying our work, right? And we also want to stick to the ethical principles where we say always verify our output and maintain intellectual ownership and be transparent where required by policy. So we don't want to over rely on ChatGPT, but we want to bridge the gap of human and AI collaboration as we develop our our literature reviews, right? So, but there are common mistakes when using AI in literature reviews that we need to identify or highlight before we get into the practicals. It's very important, right? We need to avoid blind copy and pasting, right? Which is what most of us are doing, right? Blind copy and pasting is you generate text and you do not verify or read and see if this text is making sense. You just copy and paste it to your document. We also need to avoid accepting fabricated references, right? This is a very big one. We need to make sure that when we generate text, we are not just taking text as it is, but we also need to verify that those references are accurate and thorough and true, right? We also need to be aware of oversimplifying complex debates, right? AI, generative AI, ChatGPT has a tendency of, excuse me, oversimplifying complex debates. They make them not thorough, right? They lack depth, right? And they are passed on as just, statements, right? So AI also has a problem, ChatGPT has a problem of removing disciplinary nuances, right? It tends to not be familiar with your discipline from which you come from. And the best way to address or to deal with that aspect is for you to give it context before you get to begin the prompting, right? There's a fallacy, or there's a problem of losing scholarly voice, right? You'd find that if you're not reading, or if you are not familiar with the school, the text, or if you're not familiar with the subject itself, your work will lose scholarly voice. Your voice is missing in there, right? We don't know where you're coming from. And it's before even AI came into place, that has been a problem, especially when people are basically summarizing work that has been done by other people, right? But the golden principle is we use AI to develop the synthesized and analytical literature reviews, is that AI enhances efficiency, right? It enhances efficiency. It does not replace scholarship, right? That's our philosophy, and that's how we're going to treat AI. So in the demonstration that we're going to do, we're treating AI as a research assistant or as a research instrument, right? We're not treating it as the writer for ourselves. What it's going to do is it's going to do the dirty work for us, right? And we'll do the human judgment, the verification of what AI has developed for us. So in the next few minutes, I think 10 to 15 minutes, what we're going to do is that we're going to do that demonstration of ChatGPT. I think we have 9 steps that we're going to demonstrate, making distinction between descriptive and synthesized literature review. Then we'll try to produce a 1,000 words literature review section that is synthesized using prompts that avoid hallucination and stuff like that. So yes, that's what we're going to do today in the next few minutes. Then after, when we're done, we can open the floor to conversation and stuff like that. But while I transition to the practical section, I'm just going to take 2 or 3 comments, right, so that we do not have silence in the group on what we have already presented as we prepare for that. So I'm going to open the floor for 2 or 3 participants just to give us what they think as we move on to the next section. Right, opening up to that as we move on to our new phase and category. Right, any comments? Any comments? Yes, Shonisani. There's Shonisani and there's Dr. Jerekai. Yes. So let's go in that order. Shonisai.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, how are you?
I'm fine with you. I
I'm fine,
wanted
thank
to
you.
ask, I'm doing PhD in a PhD study from the
Yeah.
presentations of the structures that you gave us.
Yes.
Is it possible for me to use all these structures, or I only choose one?
Right. So you can have an intersection of all these structures, right?
Okay.
Depending on how your PhD thesis is structured. Right. So the best approach, like I said, the best practice is to follow the thematic structure, right? The
Okay.
thematic structure. And now when you have followed the thematic structure, what will happen is that you can infuse the theoretical aspect, the theoretical synthesis, and the methodological synthesis in that thematic structure, because the thematic structure emanates from the patterns that emerge from the literature that has been arranged through the research questions. And we are saying that for a good literature review, a good literature review begins with the research questions that are converted into key questions, into subheadings, into headings and subheadings, right? And from that subheadings, you search literature, and key themes and patterns emerge, right? When you are synthesizing, reviewing that literature in that process, then that's where you bring in the sections that look at the methodological structure or the methodological gaps, and also looking at the theoretical gaps, right? So the best way is to go through the thematic approach, right? But in your thematic and synthesis, the thematic analyzation or whatever, you need to bring in what methodological gaps are, the methodological stuff that was there, but you're not discussing them as separate headings, right? But in your synthesis, when you are reviewing around that theme, you need to look at within this theme, right? There are key methodological issues that arose. There are key theoretical issues that arose, right, within this particular theme that I've reviewed. I think that will help you, because the moment you want to have different theory, different theory methodology in the same thesis or same dissertation, you end up repeating yourself. You repeat the same scholars over and again. Right. Hope that is clear. Let's go to Dr. Jerikai.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you very much, Doc, for the excellent presentation.
Right.
I'm getting a lot of
I think
feedback.
you'd consider muting one of your devices there. Yes. You can proceed. Yes, Dr. Njerikai.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Ah, I think I'm getting the feedback.
Right, proceed. We'll try to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you. Mine is a request, maybe for you to go through how we can do a bibliometric analysis of literature using AI.
All right. Okay. So that will be one of our sessions I'm writing this down, doing a bibliometric analysis, right, using AI, right? So this one is a simple one. I think this one, if we do it, it will take us only 30 minutes, right? It's a very interesting one. Thank you for bringing that up. We'll set up that session for you and the tools that will be there. But I mean, when we do things like this, we want to complete when we're working on a manuscript or whatever we're working on and complete it on the go. So this one will require around 25 to 30 minutes to complete this one. We'll put in the advert for that, and you need to be on the lookout. Then the next person here is the Samurai, then Tamsanga, then we go, yes, we need to move with time, right? Let's hear Samurai, then we hear Tamsanga, then we go to Sina, then Sobiso. Let's shoot. Yes.
Thanks a lot, Doc, for such a wonderful approach. And partly, I would say I was answered because mine was between these thematic approaches, methodological structures, and theoretical. Which ones, or do you mix all of them? But you have articulated them very well when you answered the first respondent, where you said you start with the thematic, which emanates from your questions, that comes from your objectives. Then from there, you need to interwoven the methodological and the theoretical analysis. What a good presentation. I'm taking some notes. And lastly, please, can you share this presentation on the platform so that we can also help those who also need this same important information? Thank you.
Appreciate it. So we have this this is being recorded, and it will be available on Facebook and YouTube, and Facebook and YouTube, it is available, so anybody can go back and watch these presentations. Right. Let's move on to Tamsanga, Sina, and Sobiso before we start to do the demonstrations.
I've been answered, Doc. For me, it was about the multiple types of literature methods, but you have answered that. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Right. Thank you so much. Let's see who's this is Sina. Was that Sina talking? Then Sobiso. I'm not sure who should come first there.
Yeah, I think it's me, Doc. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for this thought-provoking session. Doc, all I wanted to find out in the literature review, when my topic does not have recent literature. So how do I justify using the old literature? And also, is it a must for PhD students to have the theoretical chapter separate from chapter 2? Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't get the first question right, but I got the second one. You repeat the first one for me, but let me answer the second one. So it's the PhD level, right? It's very important to have a standalone theory chapter, right? Because you seldom use one theory, right, at a PhD level, Why I'm saying that is that if you have 4 questions, right, it's chances are these 4 questions that you have analytically, they cannot be answered by a same theory, right? They cannot be addressed by one theory, right? If you find your questions being answered by one theory, then that PhD is problematic, right? So what happens is that because you have 4 questions, you would probably have 2 theories that you need to unpack, right? And because you have 2 theories that you want to unpack, for you to unpack these theories, you are not just giving us a summary of the theories. You actually need to unpack these theories until a point where we have how they are applicable to your study, right? Because we want to, that becomes a very long section, right? That becomes a very long section. If you attach that to the literature review, assuming your literature review is already 20 to 30 pages, right? If you attach that theory section, that is 2 or 3 theories, that's also 30 pages. You're going to have 60 pages long of a chapter. And who wants to read a chapter which is 60 pages? Right. And what happens is that because you want to squeeze everything in the literature review, you're going to shrink your theory or you're going to shrink your literature review. Then both sections will lack depth because you want to feed them in a 20 pages, right? You want to feed them in a 30 pages. So it's always advised, one, because of the length, and another, two, because you want to explore depth, right? Therefore, you also need to make sure that each and every question in your study is answered using a theory, right? So that necessitates you to have that section that stands alone, right? I think that answers the second question, right? Let's go back to the first one. I think we are running out of time. We need to do the practical demonstration quick, right? Give us the first question, then we take the last hand.
Okay, the first question was my topic. Most of the information is old. There's no recent. It's like max 5 literature on recent information on the topic. So how do I justify using an article from 2015, for example?
Right. So I'm not sure your area of study is, right? But I want to assume that the justification, because there is a lack of literature that is available, right? That's enough justification for you to use literature that has been done before, right? And you are building your study on that literature, right? But with that limited literature that is current and that is recent, right? That should be the literature that you front, right, in your study. But that literature, of course, you are grounding it within the outdated literature that you have. So that should be said from the onset, that to say, because there is limited literature in this field that is current, right, and you need to there should be a strong case for that. I'm not sure how limited that literature is. I mean, such that in the past 5 years you don't have 50 people or 50 scholars that have written about your study, right? But it doesn't necessarily to be about your study, right? It can be thematic. That's why I brought the idea of concepts when you're writing a literature review. What this concept here, that it has been explored, but it has not been explored in my discipline, in my study, in a study that is similar to mine, but it has been explored, and this is what they've said, and these are the gaps that are there. Then my study comes in here, right? So if you work around concepts and not subjects and not authors, you'd get more literature that is relevant, right? That is recent when you walk around concepts. So when you are looking at a concept of, for example, gender in media, right? There is not much literature that has been looked at when you're looking at South African case, but the concept itself has been explored. Look at those who have explored the concept, right, and what they've done. And therefore, that becomes a gap for justification for your study. Right, hope that answer. Let's take the last hand and move on to our practical demonstration. The last hand, please, is the last hand here is Sobiso.
Yes. Greeting everyone.
Yes.
Thank you, Doc. I think my question is very simple. I would like to know if these steps you have shared with us are only applicable when you're conducting a dissertation, or it's also applicable when you are doing a journal article.
Right, they are applicable. I think so they are applicable in everything, right? But the universal practice would be the thematic one, right? Depending on your study, with your objectives of your study, right? You'd want. I love theoretical studies, right? Conceptual studies. My literature is normally theoretical literature, right? For journal articles and stuff like that. But the moment you come back to when you're looking, for example, journal articles, I think the theoretical literature is always the best, right? Because it integrates both the theory, the themes, and the theory at the same time, right? And also look at some findings in it, right? So these are applicable in all, depending on what the objective of the study is. If you're looking at a conceptual paper, well, the theoretical literature review will be the best. But I'm not sure to what extent will the methodological structure apply in a journal article, but I'm quite sure that in a dissertation it works. But these cut across, right? They cut across. But in journal articles, normally I suggest that I apply the theoretical literature review, and I've seen that reviewers love that a lot, where you integrate. So I don't have a separate literature review, then a separate theory. No, everything is intertwined. So my subject heading there will be literature and theoretical perspectives, right? So everything is intertwined in that aspect, right? For a journal articles, because I don't have the whole luxury of writing 10 pages of theory and 5 pages of literature. Everything should be intertwined in 1,000 words. So the theory would work best, but depending on what the objective of the studies are. All right, colleagues, thank you so much for those questions. Because it shows that colleagues are following. So thank you so much. So what we want to do here, right? We want to develop a synthesized literature review, right, on my screen, right? But when you're working with ChatGPT or any generative AI, the first thing that you need to do is you need to work on questions, right? You need to work on questions. You must have questions. Right? So if you don't understand your research question or the central research question for your study, you are doomed. Right? So we begin by a question. So what we want to do is that synthesis must always be guided by your research question, right? And AI follows your direction. That's one thing that we must ascertain, that I always argue that AI does not have objective on its own, right? Without the objective that you give them to do, right, they cannot generate anything, right? So they do not have objective, they follow our direction. And the best way to get AI or generative AI to follow our direction is to give them the questions, right? So if give them the questions, and when you are working on that, you need to give them context. If you remember last week, in our presentation, we said you need to have questions, right? So I'm going to use here, this is my questions, right? I'm going to copy and paste. So I'm giving it a context, a scope. My research examines how women politicians are presented in South African media, right? And analyze the following abstracts to support the literature, right? The reason why I'm saying analyze the following abstracts is because you remember last week we in some of our presentations we learned about how to search for literature, right? I'm not going back there to search for literature, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide AI, this platform here, with a number of studies. So two ways that you can do this is you can use a CSV file, or you can copy and paste the studies that you want to synthesize or to use to write your literature review on, right? So I've copied 5 studies here that are related to what I'm doing, right? So I'm saying here, analyze the following abstracts, right? Analyze the following abstracts, okay, in these studies. Analyze the abstracts in this study. Right. So what we want to look at here, we want to look at the difference between a descriptive literature review and a synthesized literature review, right? So for us to get to a synthesized literature review, like I said, we need to anchor our synthesis to a common research problem, a certain research problem or a research question. And this is what we have given us. So here, the topic here, what would be our problem or what would be our question, right? We need to be familiar with our question. What question are we trying to answer, right? So in this particular case, our question would be, how does the media report on women, right? Does the media report on women politicians in South Africa? So we need to run a synthesis, or we want to run what a descriptive paragraph, right? So it says to me, searching for abstracts and analyzing themes, right? It's doing that. Let's give it some time, or we can choose here to say answer now, right? If you want a quick fix, if you want a quick answer, we can just say answer now, right? We'll get something, but let's give it some time so that it can think and synthesize what these studies are. Or alternatively, I can choose to upload, right? I can choose to upload. We are running a bit slow because of the network, I guess. So I can choose to upload so that I reduce the amount of time that is being done. I can upload my studies, right? Here are the studies, right? But here I'm going to say answer now, right? So that we can get an idea of what we've been provided, right? So it says the abstracts provided reflect a converging yet contextually differentiated body of scholarship on the mediated construction of women politicians. Taken together, they illuminate persistent gender framing patterns, discursive marginalization, symbolic containment, and emerging counter narratives, right? The synthesis below identifies the key thematic trajectories relevant to South African studies. Right now, it's giving me here structural gender bias in political news representation. That becomes a theme, right? A dominant theme across, right? So I take this down, this becomes my first theme, and these are the studies that are there, right? Moringa and Ndlovu 2026. These are the studies that I've provided it, right? Then the second theme becomes framing legitimacy and how questions of political readiness are, right? Then these are the studies that are there, right? Then the third one is visual framing and symbolic empowerment, right? These are the themes that are there. Then intersectionality and racialized gender representation. So basically, it gave me a total of 5 themes, right? And upon these 5 themes that we have, remember these themes, they are not coming from the blue, they are coming from the key research question here. This question is where these themes are coming from. But to say that these themes are coming from the question only is an understatement. The theme are coming from the studies, but guided by the question that we have given it, right? So we are not thinking out of the blue. We are thinking through our questions, right? We're thinking through our questions. So the next step that we need to do, so this is just basically a description of what, this is a basic description. The reason why I'm saying this is a description, we are having an author by author literature review, right? So you can this is what we normally find. So it says the systematic review by Moringa situates the South African what. Then it goes to another study here by Okpaswali. Then it goes to another study here by D. Val and Van Leuven. Then it goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. That's what normally a systematic is, right? A descriptive study is, right? If I say to it here, write this in a paragraph format. Right. If I say write in a paragraph format, right, you'd see that this paragraph format here is still more descriptive, and this is what most people present. Most people present. Right. This is one thing that most people present. It says to us, we because of the interest of time, we're not going to allow it to take time thinking, right? We're just going to rush it to get the things done, right? So our outcome here, I say the reviewed studies collectively demonstrate that the presentation of women politicians in South Africa structurally, right, then say the systematic review by Moringa, despite from several advancements, then another Moringa, then and etc. comparative evidence, right? In as much as this looks good, right, this is still a descriptive literature review. Right, it is not well synthesized, right? Because number one, it is not, remember the key things that we said, that the systematic review, the analyzed or the synthesized literature review, it needs to look at the key aspects that we mentioned, and those aspects, if the thematic aspect, the comparative aspect, the methodological aspect, and the theory and the divergence and similarities, all those things are still missing in here. They are not there, right? They are still missing. Even the kind of citation, I mean, of course, it is directing us to the actual study here, right, to see that it actually drew from that study, right? But we are not so happy about this synthesis that is happening, right? So descriptive report studies individually, like what we've seen here, right? We've seen a description of studies because they are being reported individually, right? But what we need to do, we need to identify themes and patterns, right, in these studies. That's what we need to do before we get the final outcome. So we need to identify the key patterns and themes, right? So what we need to do now, we want to rewrite these paragraphs so that it moves from descriptive reporting to analytical synthesis, right? So our prompt would be, right, you need to learn how to do prompts, right? It's very important. So we need to say, so we're saying rewrite this paragraph so that it moves from descriptive reporting to analytical synthesis. All right, let's see what will come out. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift from individual articles to patterns across the body of literature, right? We want to move away from the basic paragraph or individual basis to move towards the patterns and stuff like that. So we want to see the difference in it, the difference between the one above and the one that follows. So now it begins by saying across studies, the common thread is not merely that women politics are treated differently, but that media systems function as symbolic gatekeepers, right? And I love symbolic gatekeepers because this is a pattern, right? This is a pattern, right? It's moving towards the issue of patterns that are identified in studies, right? Then the South African systematic review, then it moves. There's another concept again. It talks about symbolic exclusion, right? Then it talks about the unreadiness of women, right? The reason why I'm able to pick these things up is because I know my field of study, right? I know my field of study. So I know these things when they feed up. The issue of unfitness, this is a key concept, right? In literature about women, reporting women leaders. It looks about the issue of visibility, right? But what these paragraphs missing is that these paragraphs are missing citations, right? In as much as they are synthesized, we do not have your citations, right? Because we didn't give it a command. What it has, it's showing us where these key themes or these core concepts are coming from. They're coming from these studies here, right? They're coming from these key studies here that we've provided for them. If I click here, it will download the study for me, but we're not there yet, right? So let's right, it is moving from there, right? So we have a somewhat synthesized paragraph, but it's still not to the point where we want it to be, because we cannot copy and paste this. Like most of us want ready stuff that is ready to copy and paste, right? Right. So we need now to ask AI to justify clusters and improve themes labels. So we say we want AI to explain the logic behind these thematic clusters and refine the labels to make them thematic, analytical rigorous. So what we simply need now is to say, we need to strengthen the conceptual precision and analytical depth, right? So that we avoid vague categories and use precise analytical labels, right? So what prompts do we need here, right? We want a better prompt, right? We want a better prompt. And this prompt here, it says, explain the logic behind these thematic clusters and refine the labels to make them analytical rigorous. Right, then I'm going to add here, make sure you cite using APA referencing style. Referencing style, then I give it an example, author, then yeah, right, here, right. Then I would want to say, avoid hallucinations. Hallucinations and fabrications. We have a very long presentation on avoiding hallucinations and presentation that you might need to go and watch. Avoid hallucinations and and fabrications, right? So let's see now what would come out from what we have done. It's taking time to think. I'm going to say answer now, right? Because it's when we have time, we can actually wait for it to think through. Right, so we said explain the logic behind these thematic clusters and refine the labels to make them analytically rigorous. So the purpose was for us to understand where these themes are coming from, right? So the first theme was detect discursive framing legitimacy, right? Then the second one is narrative symbolic containment, right? Then the third one is multimodal construction. Then they are refined here, right? So the first cluster can be analytically refined, is discursive legitimacy, deficit, and stuff like that. So here, what is happening is that you are actually engaging with the platform to understand how we got to these themes, right, as we are developing our literature review. And ladies and gentlemen, this process here will allow you to be able to defend when you're doing a viable share of your study. When you are presenting your study or defending your study, you'll be able to defend and explain how you get to these themes or the literature as you read and understand what is coming in there. You'll be able to engage with your text. You'll be able to engage and to read what key themes are there, what clusters are there, what model gender representation are there, what are the themes that are there, how did we get to the themes, right? Those are the things now that the future researcher is going to be asked to say, you know, we know you're using AI to write your literature review, but now let's test your understanding, your knowledge of your literature review. Sit down, come here, tell us what you did, understand, make us understand these themes. How did you get to these themes? Explain to these themes, explain these themes to us, right? So when we are here, now we've seen that we have the themes are there, they are explained, they are, how we got to those is explained. But now what do we want to achieve? Because we have the themes and we have the citations, they look accurate to me, we might need to verify those, right? But how do we get to a good to a good synthesized literature review, right? So what we need now is to say, let's generate a good paragraph. an example of a well-synthesized paragraph, because we've made the difference between a paragraph that is descriptive in nature. Now we want to look at the one that is well-synthesized and look at its key elements, right, as we go down, right? So our key prompt here will be, now, after all is said and done, right? After all is said and done, now generate for us a well-synthesized literature review, right? So we should not forget to say cite using APA or Harvard or something like that. Then you give it an example. It's author, right? Author, then yeah. We just want one paragraph, right? We don't want a lot of paragraphs. We just want one paragraph of how the well-synthesized literature review would look like. I like that it's actually telling me what it's doing there to show that it's thinking, and we call this a chain of thought process. Train of thought process. Right. So it says to me here, a thematical reading of scholarship on women polities and media indicates that gender bias operates less as sporadic negative and a more structural. This becomes our topic sentence, right? Then across South Africa, it is bringing context, right? Then it involves the citations, right? This legitimacy here, remember we said the scholarly voice should always feature. It says this legitimacy problem becomes particularly pronounced when women seek executive office. South African coverage of women presidential hopefuls is shown to reproduce a patriarchal readiness, right? Now, this is where the scholarly voice is and ends here, right? It comes in here, then it is supported here. This is the scholarly voice, and it is supported here by this citation, right? Then it goes on to say, complementing this legitimacy lens, a second thematic strand centers on differentiated evaluation strands, right? Now we are synthesizing. Then it says here, crucially, such bias is not only communicated through overtly hostile tone, it is also echoed in routine logistic, right? A third analytical strand. So this section here, in as much as it is long, you would see that we are doing a thematic analysis of what literature is, right? But we are not looking at what the scholars were saying. We are drawing on from the themes. We are drawing on from the themes that we have, and our themes are informed by the literature. And then we synthesize what those themes mean from the theoretical perspective, of theoretical point of view, right? But we can also say, review the literature and synthesize it from a methodological structure, right? Let's see what we have and see the difference in terms of, this is the thematic one, right? No, let's not bother ourselves about this, because this is a reference point where this information is coming from. Adding to your citation here, it also give you this here. If you click here, that will be the way, that the place where it is coming from, right? Let's just say answer now so that we can get to what we have. Right. So now here's those who were asking about the methodological one, right? It says here that a methodological synthesis of the reviewed scholarship reviews that research on the representation of women politicians is predominantly anchored in qualitative interpretive designs with limited but emerging methodological diversification across. Then it gives us the context, right? Then the South African systematic, now it is categorizing it, right? Here we have this one illustrated qualitative one, Moringa here and Sunderland are saying also looking at qualitative one. Then in the context of, right, it is also looking at a quantitative one. But look, again, this is more or less like descriptive. This section here is still more like descriptive because it's looking at study by study or author by author. We want it to be synthesized, right? So we give the command, move beyond descriptive to synthesis, analytical synthesis, right? Right. Not by author, but by research methods or design, right? Right, using paragraph format. It's always important, right? So we had this one here that was more or less descriptive in as much as it gives us what is actually at ease, right? So when you've done your thematic analysis here, right, we've done a thematic analysis of all the studies and stuff like that. You can decide now to move on to look at the methodological aspect of your literature, all the literature that you've reviewed. You can do what we call the mapping, right? The methodological mapping of your literature, right? Those of us who are familiar with the bibliometric analysis, you have that section, the bibliometric analysis, where you're actually looking at your mapping, right? So now this section here is very beautiful. I love it because it says a methodological synthesis of the literature. This is our topic sentence, but it says interpretive discourse-oriented content monitoring and multimodal approaches. These are the common one. Then here it begins to look at the cluster, methodological cluster, looking at systematic content analysis, right? These are the studies that look at systematic content analysis, right? But you would find that there's not enough citations here. We're going to need to give it to say it must be densely cited, but taken together, the methodological architecture of the field, this is beautiful, right? Reviews and imbalance. Now, this is what we call by a synthesized literature review and identifying gaps in literature, right? There's a few imbalance. The literature is heavily output orientated, right? Focused on text and images, interpretive epistemologies, and only modestly triangulated. Production studies, ethnographic news research, experimental audience design, and longitudinal causal analysis remain comparatively rare. So these here are gaps, right? This structure orientation explains why the literature is strong in diagnosing representational bias, but weaker in explaining its institutional reproduction or its measured political effects. Methodologically, the field would benefit from number one, mixed method design. So when you have come to this point, ladies and gentlemen, this is where you know that you've done justice to your literature review. When you are synthesizing and reporting the literature like this, in this manner, identifying gaps not by looking at what this one is argued or findings only, but when you are looking at the thematic structure, the key themes that are there, the key concepts that are there, the key methodologies that are there, I can also choose and say, review the literature, right, based on, right, theories and, right? Theories applied across studies, right? In one paragraph. We don't want to waste time. In one paragraph. Right. So you'd remember when I was doing the PowerPoint presentation, I spoke about divergences, I spoke about agreements, all those things are being captured here. Right. If you go to our previous one, it tells you about the divergence, right? It tells you about the disagreements, tells you about the similarities and stuff like that. So this is at this point now, when your literature is synthesized, you are not reporting the authors and the findings and the context. This one was done. You're actually synthesizing literature based on, right? So this will be a paragraph that is focusing on theory. A theory-based synthesis of the literature shows that research on the representation of women in politicians is predominantly anchored in feminist media theories and framing with complementary use of discourse analysis, right? Then we go on and on and on, right? Colleagues, this is a synthesized literature review that is focusing on theory driven. This one is a theory driven, right? So you can do that for all the studies and so you can actually choose to say group all theories, group all studies that focus on feminist theory, right? On group all studies that focus on framing theory, right? Or group all studies that focus on the framing, the critical discourse analysis as it pertains to the reporting of women leaders. Colleagues, this is what we regard to as a synthesized literature review. Now, the question is, what do you do with this work when it is done? Right? This work needs to be verified. This work needs to go through thorough verification, human judgment, but chances of it being hallucinating are very slim because I provided this literature. So it's already linking what has been said here, everything that is said here, right? It's linked to these two PDF formats. If I click here, it gives me an option to download where the literature is coming from, right? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the short demonstration that we had prepared for you, right? We emphasize and say, do go and verify your information when you are done reporting your synthesis or your literature review. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our presentation right now. We have demonstrated what it is, the difference between a descriptive literature review, the difference between a methodological structure, a thematic structure, and a conceptual structure. This is what we had for you today. Thank you so much for attending. We're opening now to questions, comments, additions, subtractions, and divisions. If you have any, the floor is open for you. If you want anything to do with your study that you want us to engage with you, you can book a free consultation with us for 20 minutes from Monday to Friday at any time between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. on a daily. Free consultations for 30 minutes just to understand what you are studying and give you some insights of direction on your study. Right, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Moringa from AfriLeader Forum, AfriLeader, I almost said AfriForum, okay? Not in AfriForum, it's AfriLeaders in AI. So to those of us who have questions, comments, and everything, this is the time. Let's open up to those who want to comment. So the first hand is coming from Cindy Swap. Cindy Swap, over to you.
Thanks, Doc, for an informative session. Mine is just to check if we can expect maybe in the future a session that will talk to the development now of questionnaires and interview schedules, maybe getting assistance, using AI assistance so that the questionnaires or the interview or the interview questions and the questionnaires, you get best results that will allow or assist you in the analysis process to address your research questions.
Yes, yes. So if you've been following, I'm sure you have been, right? So what we are doing is that we are developing a proposal on every Saturday, right? So we started with the question, we started with the ethics, we started with the topic, then we did the topics, then we did how to search for literature. Now today, how to write a literature review. So what we did today was actually to write a literature review for your proposal or for your dissertation, right? After this, we're gonna need to move on to get to do the theory of your literature review of your thesis. Then we go to the methodology, right? Then we go to instruments, right? Developing your instruments, right? We develop the instruments. After the instruments, we're gonna get into the data analysis, data presentation, and stuff like that, so that you know what to do. And if you are following every Saturday, by the 27th of June this year, if you are writing your PhD thesis or master's dissertation, you would have completed it, right? If you follow us every Saturday. If it is your proposal, you would have already be submitted your proposal for the ethics review. So yes, we'll get to that point with you where we'll develop that aspect.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Right. Let's see another, if we have any other questions. Right. There is, how do I put this content in my research with Turnitin in mind? Do I need to rewrite? Right. So you need to paraphrase some stuff, right? Turnitin normally, so the question of plagiarism is a tricky one because this content here won't be picked as plagiarism on Turnitin, right? 0% plagiarism on Turnitin, right? But when you're worried about the AI index, right? You're gonna need to paraphrase and write it in your own words, right? We said avoid copying and pasting blindly, right? Whatever that is generated from ChatGPT, it needs to be verified, right? Then there is powerful presentation. Thank you so much. Does verification also involves a reproduction of same content in own words and understanding? In fact, when you extract literature reviews, as it isn't that plagiarism, right? So verification also involves rewriting in your own words. Human judgment also put in your voice, your scholarly voice, right? Then there is Dr. Jerekai. Thank you very much, Doc. Our heads together again. Let's meet next week, Saturday. Thank you so much. Then there is how do I put this content in my research team? Right, I have asked this question before, Dr. Moringa. Theoretical framework and conceptual framework, are they the same thing, or do you have to adapt one or the other? Right. So the question is, basic answer is, when you using one theory, it's a theoretical framework. The moment we use two theories, that becomes a conceptual framework. Right. So in masters, you can use a theoretical framework where you focus on one theory. But the moment that section borrows from two different theories, you are not borrowing theories, you're borrowing concepts from the theory so that you can form a conceptual framework. So it's called a conceptual framework where two or more theories are applied in a study. That becomes a conceptual framework. A theoretical framework is where you are using one theory. For free consultation, which platform do I use to engage with you? Thank you so much. Right, for free platforms, if you want to engage with us, just go to MG Research website and book a consultation with us, right? We'll tell you what time it is for 20 minutes, 30 minutes free consultation every day. You can, beyond 30 minutes, that will be billed, right? Do we have any other comments, colleagues? Right. Do we have any questions? Any hands? All right. Let me check. For free console, is the presentation available? Right. The presentation is available online. You can go and rewatch the presentation online. Stay up to date. We've put a link there for you to subscribe on our pages and watch all the previous videos that I have. Should my conceptual framework be based on the 3 or so frameworks? Yes. So you at the end, after you've explained all the theories that you've used, you're gonna need to have a conceptual framework in the form of diagram that maps out how these concepts are integrated to answer your research questions. It's very important, right? Thank you very much. This is very helpful. Sina, thank you so much. Mapingure T, thank you so much for attending. Please spread the word. We are again at it next week, Saturday, same time and same place. Right. There is someone who is joining in now while we are completing. Right. Is there a hand? Do I see a hand? No, there is no hand. All right, colleagues, let's call it a day. Thank you so much for joining. Let's meet again next week. We'll send you what theme are we focusing on next week. I suggest I'll discuss with the colleagues at the office. Maybe we must focus on theoretical frameworks, but we'll advise you what we'll be doing next week. Be on the lookout, be on the watch out of what we'll be doing. Thank you so much, colleagues. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone so
Bye.
much.
Yeah, thank you, Dexter. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you.